Assalamu alaikum and very good afternoon. So first of all, I'd like to thank Prof. Rizal Effendi, the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Al-Bukhari International University, for giving me the opportunity to share some of my knowledge and experiences through supervision and attending Viva sessions and other sessions. And also, I would like to welcome all of you, those of you who are with me now in this webinar. Definitely today's topic is a very special one, very important and very critical for business and social science research. And as I mentioned, those of you who have just joined, today's session video will not be given to you. You have to get it from my YouTube channel. You can see on the screen now, Platform for Research and Development. It will be uploaded there. I have few videos there, and this video will be also uploaded there. Now, the high achievement always takes place in the framework of high expectation. So I'm going to start with that. Your achievement depends on the kind of a framework that you design. If your expectation is touching the sky, then your plan would be like that, you know. But if your plan is to just walk on the street, and you will be planning like that, you know, always walking on the street. So students who plan to get A's, if he doesn't get A, he will at least get A minus or B plus, you know. But if the student planning to just pass, if he doesn't pass, he will fail. So that's how important the research framework is. Research framework will somehow determine the kind of research outcomes we are going to have. So let me remind again, refresh our mind that research is an organized, objective, and systematic process to study a particular problem that needs a solution. So research is done basically once a problem is identified and defined, and then at the end of research, we'd like to see some kind of solution. So the research framework or study framework or theoretical framework or conceptual framework, whatever we name it, we are going to do it is based on the identified and defined research problem. We cannot forget that. We cannot run away from this. Research problem got to be identified and defined correctly. And based on that, we will draw a framework. That's what we are going to say, theoretical framework, which is done based on theories, right? Conceptualizing the research study with the study starts with title, definitely. All of us, when you did our PhD, we have a title. Then we struggle to identify and define research problem from theoretical, contextual, and methodological perspective. Then we'll have a purpose statement. Then we will translate research problem into research questions. We have research objectives. Then we'll have a framework and hypothesis. So this is basically, these are the components of a research. So we start with research statement, problem statement. Then we followed on with research question, research objectives. We'll find out theories and assumptions, and then we'll do literature review. We'll find out variables. And once we identify the kind of variable that will help us to solve the research problem we have, then only we will develop the theoretical framework. That's where we are in now. So this is how it starts, right? If your topic is distance learning, for example, the research problem could be lack of students in distance classes. The purpose could be to study why students do not attend distance education classes at the community college. And the question would be, does the use of website technology in the classroom deter students from enrolling to distance education classes? So the topic is very general, and from there we follow on and move into very specific topic. That's what we are saying now, right? We have a research problem. From there, we break it down into few research questions, and those research questions would be helping us to draw the theoretical framework or conceptual framework later on in our study. I would also like to remind you that we got to be very clear at the beginning of our study, the unit of analysis. I experienced some, quite unhappy situation during the final Viva session, whereby a student cannot answer the question of what is your unit of analysis. So that got to be very clear. So the unit of analysis is basically the unit that we analyze, the unit where the data comes from. So it could be individual, could be household, could be organization, could be departments, could be geographical area and all that. But what is important is when you draw the theoretical framework, we got to be very careful because we have to keep in mind of in-depth analysis with us. Because theories are divided into two. Some theories are individual level theory and some theories are organization level theories. So if your in-depth analysis is individual, then your theory could be individual level theory. And if your in-depth analysis is organization, then you may have to have theories from organization level theories that you have to keep in mind. The type of studies in social science and business basically are 5. We usually have reporting, descriptive study, predictive kind of study, explanatory and exploratory kind of studies that we have. I think it's very easy to understand. Reporting basically we summarize and report the facts and figures. Descriptive basically we describe, you know, in who, what, when, where, and how sort of questions. We collect data and we describe the findings that we have. Predictive study is we predict the situation based on the elements that we identified as predictive variables. Later on, we'll have more understanding on it. And explanatory research whereby we explain the phenomena. And exploratory whereby lack of studies are there and it requires more studies to be done. So it is a very well focused study and we try to provide something new in exploratory kind of research. So these 4 kind of studies that we have also determine the kind of theoretical framework or conceptual framework that we are going to develop. For descriptive kind of study, you may not need a theoretical framework, just a conceptual framework could be enough. For reporting also, the conceptual framework could be enough. You may not need a theoretical framework. But for exploratory, explanatory, and predictive kind of research, you may require to have theoretical framework. These are some of the jargons that we use, language of research as we call. In any research, we cannot run away from these topics, the terms. Okay, it starts with concepts, constructs, conceptual scheme, operation definition, variables, hypotheses, theory, and models. These all terms should be clearly discussed today and described and discussed today, hopefully, later on. So the success of research is dependent on clear conceptualization of concepts and shared understanding of concepts. Again, we'll have more discussion on it. Because remember, we do research because we have a problem in hand. And the problem that we have to get the concept, ideas, concept, constructs, then assumption, then finally we come to theory. All right. Later on, we'll have more discussion on this, inshallah. So these are the building blocks of a theory. It starts with ideas. Ideas could be something very ambiguous. Something may not be relevant. So when ideas we share with people and then we develop some kind of shared understanding of something which is relevant, become useful, it become concept. When you conceptualize it, then after that we will break it down into constructs. Those are basically variables in our framework. And when you have construct, then we assume some, propose some relationship between or among the constructs. Those become propositions or hypotheses. And when hypotheses are accepted or rejected, based on that, we propose a theory. So these are a very simple description of those concepts. I don't think I'm going to explain more on it. Basically, we start with the theory, then concept, then construct and proposition, and then we move to theory. And then in social science and business research also, we do have to operationalize our construct.
I think somebody's presenting, so we cannot see your slides.
Okay.
Somebody else.
Can you please stop presenting? If someone is presenting, can you please stop presenting, please? Can you see my slide now?
No, don't see the slide.
I see. Okay.
Yes, I can see.
You can see now?
Yeah, I can see.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
sir.
But I cannot see.
I cannot see.
No, I can't see.
I see. What I do then, I stop sharing. I share again. Okay, okay, it's all right. I stop sharing, then I share again. Let's see who is sharing there. If someone is sharing, kindly please stop sharing so that people can see my screen, please. Okay. Can you share my slide now?
Right.
Yeah, now I can see it.
All right. I can
Okay, thank you.
Yes, now it's okay.
Okay, that's where we were. Constructs are basically very. Constructs are basically. Can you switch off your microphone, please?
Hello.
Please switch off your microphone, please, to have this smooth.
Ya udah.
Can you please switch off your microphone, please? Okay, operationalization. Once you have idea, then concept, we will break down the concept into a few constructs. Those become actually our variable. So constructs are basically a generalized idea about a class of object attributes or occurrences like satisfaction, loyalty. So it's already become a variable. Now, when you have the construct, we have many different definitions of a construct. And different researchers may have different definitions. So we have to operationalize in terms of our research. We have to make sure we have our own definition, the definition that is adopted or adapted and conceptualized for our research. Okay, so we will operationalize the construct in terms of our research. And from the operation and definition, we may even find out the dimension. For example, if we want to measure organization performance, it can be measured by financial and non-financial aspects. So you have already got two dimensions there, right? If you want to measure employee performance, it can be measured through quality, productivity, and many other aspects. So those dimensions got to be identified. And then later we proceed to elements that become the items or every questions, you know. So one variable, we may have 5 items, 10 items. So one variable is a construct. And from there, we'll have elements to measure the construct. So to measure a variable or construct, we'll have many items. It depends, you know. If we adopt or adapt, it could be 5, could be 10, could be even 10, 15. It depends on kind of variable that we have. Now, a theory is defined as a proposition to be proved. It is a Greek word from theorem. It is basically a set of related statements that describe or explain phenomena in a systematic way. So a theory is basically a statement that describes phenomena in a systematic way. And then the third one, let me read it that, a set of interrelated constructs, definition, proposition that present a systematic view of phenomenon. So theory basically presents interrelated constructs. So you have few variables there. And the last one is very clear. It is a statement of relationship between two variables, one acting as dependent, another acting as independent. So a theory basically having few constructs. Remember, we say the theory start with idea, then we move to concept, then construct, then proposition. Finally, we come out with a theory. So the constructs are basically variables. So few variables comes together. The relationship of all those variables basically makes up a theory. And that one you have to keep in mind. Now, what is the important of having a theory or importance of theory for research? So this guy, Auguste Comte, he said, facts can be observed without the guidance of some theory. Without such guidance, our facts could be desultory or fruitless. And we could not retain them. For the most of part, we could not even perceive them. Meaning theory is very important. Without theory, you cannot really have something, a good outcome, okay, in research. These are the types of theory that usually we come across when you do literature review. And we got to have clear understanding of these types of theories. The first kind of theory, we call them descriptive theory, a theory that describe only a phenomena, or presents a phenomena only. It explains why one event is associated with another. That's what we call descriptive theory. It's a very shallow kind of theory. This theory could be applicable for conceptual framework, but not for theoretical framework. Grand theory, which is a macro theory, it's a bigger theory, you know, that covers large segments of our life. That's what we call grand theory. For example, we have Maslow law of hierarchical needs. It covers a huge segments of human experience. It's a grand theory or macro theory. And then the third group of theory, we call them middle range theory, which is very specific to certain phenomena. For example, those of you who are very familiar in finance, we have agency theory that talks about relationship between manager and owners. So that is a middle range theory, okay? And we have many theories like that. For example, we have Hasbach theory of motivation. That is a very specific phenomena, right? It's motivation alone. It is a middle range theory. So there are many theories we can talk about. There are a lot of theories are there, falls under middle range theory. Next three are very important for researcher, okay? First one, we call it borrowed theory. It is a non-nursing model used by nurse researcher. What does it mean? It means that a new researcher has come out with a theory, but it has not been researched again. So we borrow that theory and we try to develop our theoretical framework from that model or that theory, and we try to validate or verify that theory. That's what we call borrowed theory. We borrow a theory from someone which is not being validated yet, not being verified yet. The effectiveness of the theory has not been tested. We call it borrowed theory. And when that borrowed theory is validated, verified, tested, then we call it a shared theory. Meaning that it's theory, it is shared by many researchers. So you call it shared theory. It may not be a middle range theory, it may not be a grand theory. It is a smaller theory, but yet it is shared, okay? There are many theories like that. For example, like technology acceptance model, TAM, which doesn't fall under middle range theory, doesn't fall under grand theory. It is basically a shared theory, all right? It's a theory
and its application, where its theories will be applied.
Yeah, yeah. For question answer session, we'll have a question answer session at the end. We'll have more discussion on it, all right? So we have descriptive theory, we have grand theory, middle range theory, then we have borrowed theory, we have shared theory, and we have grounded theory. When we cannot find any theory, and then we collect the data, we play with the data. From the data, we run and do analysis and come out with some kind of explanation on a phenomena. That is called grounded theory. But I do have additional slide for you to understand more on the grounded theory. So grounded theory, we say it represents an inductive investigation in which the researcher poses his question about information provided by respondents. So what a researcher will do will be very inquisitive and will continue asking question and question, repeatedly questioning, you know, on responses that being derived from respondents, okay? So it is like you are questioning and questioning and questioning. Finally, you are coming to a conclusion. So you do not have a theory. Rather, you are collecting raw data and facts and figure. From there, you are going to come out with something. You are proposing, could be proposing a theory or could be proposing a conceptual framework. When you differentiate the theoretical framework and conceptual framework, that's where it comes in. Grounded theory are actually used for conceptual framework, not for theoretical framework. Theoretical framework comes with the theory. Conceptual framework comes with concepts. And most of the time when we have data-driven analysis and we have findings, that will be mostly on grounded theory, and it will be useful for drawing the conceptual framework. Now, why do you need a theoretical framework? Basically, it provides a good framework for you to analyze the data. It identifies the variable to be measured. We put only the variables in the framework, right? It explains how one variable possibly would be relating to another variable. And then also it shows the scope of the research because you are already putting a boundary of your research and putting that in the frame. So once you put it in the frame, meaning that's your scope of study. And also it helps you to do analysis and later interpretation of your data. Now, is the theoretical framework applicable to all research? The answer is no, definitely not. But when you have correlational and causal studies, it is a must. If you are doing a correlational study or causal study, then it is a must. You must have theoretical framework. All right. Now, this is the definition of variable. Variable means what? Something that varies. All right. So, for example, like act of purchase. When you purchase, the price could be different. You buy a different amount at different time. You buy at different places at different time. So it varies. Personality traits of a person, it varies. Okay. Attributes to communication skills varies people to people. All right. So there could be many examples like that. So variable basically something that varies. We have to remember that, a simple definition of that. Okay. There are basically three types of variable. First one, we call it dichotomous, when you have two categories. And when you have more than two categories, we call it discrete variable. For example, like ethnic background, in Malaysia, we have Malays, Chinese, and others. For example, like ethnic background, in Malaysia, we have Malays, and then this example, ethnic background, in Malaysia, we have Malays. Somebody's microphone is on. Can you please speak up? And then, kindly please switch off your microphone, and can you please keep your handphone also away from you, kindly please, and please do not present so it disturbs the session. Sorry. So we have basically categorical variable and continuous variable. Categorical variable can be divided into two. One is dichotomous, when you have two factors, say male and female, two categories. There are more than two categories, like ethnic or education level or religious affiliation, for example, are discrete. And we have continuous variables, say, for example, income. If you just keep it blank and people fill in, or you can put it also in range, that become discrete variable again. Age could be continuous if we keep it blank in the form. It can be also discrete if you put it the range and categorize it. But the questionnaire, usually we prepare, we put it in the Likert scale, and we have 1 to 5 scale, and we have few items, we combine them, and then it becomes continuous. It has implications on analysis, because if you have categorical variable, then your analysis would be mostly driven into non-parametric, and when you have continuous variable, then it will dive you towards parametric statistical tests. I cannot have more discussion on it. When you do attend SPSS software workshop or workshop on PLS, I think you should be clear on that. Now, this is now moving into very important aspects now for today's talk. In a variable, you can see this kind, in a framework, you will see this kind of variable, dependent variable, independent variable, intervening variable. All right, dependent variable is the topic of interest of this study, which is dependent on another variable. And independent variable are the causes, the symptoms of a problem become independent. All the constructs become independent variable, will affect the dependent variable. And in between the dependent independent variable, we call them intervening variable. So those are basically modulating and mediating variable. It could be also control variable, which I'm going to explain slowly. So modulating variable basically helps you to increase or decrease the relationship or effects of independent to dependent. We'll have more discussion on it, so no worries. Mediating variable also falls in between dependent and independent. But basically the role of mediating variable is to establish a link between independent and dependent. Again, we'll have more discussion on it. We may have even certain research variables before independent variable. We call them antecedent. I'll show you in the framework. And some research, we may even have outcome variable. So these are the 4 categories, right? These 6 categories. We studied dependent, independent, then moderating, mediating, antecedent, and outcome variable. Keep that in your mind. And slowly, I will bring you to the framework. Now, when we develop framework, remember, this theoretical framework must be developed with the support of a theory. So if you develop a theoretical framework based on a theory, we will call the theory as underpinning theory. And sometimes one theory may not be enough to draw your framework or develop a framework. In that case, we may integrate 2 or 3 theories and develop a framework. In that case, the dominating theory would be the underpinning theory, and the other theories would be supporting theories. But again, we got to be very careful. When you have more than one theories, we have to make sure that the propositions or assumptions of all theories are similar. If you have one theory which propositions are different from other theories and you combine them, you will run into trouble later on. Okay, so you can have more than one theory, but we have to make sure propositions are very similar. I'm going to show you example how we develop using more than one theory. So this is theoretical framework which identifies variable.
Sorry, doctor. Sorry, doctor. We can't see.
You can't see the slide again.
Sorry.
Okay.
No, I can see it. I can see the slides.
Yeah, I can see also.
I think the slides are there. Slides are there. You should be able to see. Maybe you can go out. Yeah, that one.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Shall I
Yes, I
continue?
can see.
Okay, so theoretical framework basically identify the variables investigated in a study. We see all the variable there. And also it will show the direction of interaction. All right. And also we can hypothesize looking at the diagram itself. Okay, let me start with framework. Okay, that is a title, Factors Affecting Internet Abuse at Workplace. By looking at the title itself, we should be able to identify what is dependent variable. I'm not going to ask you, there are so many of you in the group. So the dependent variable from here, the title definitely internet abuse. And factors would be the independent variable. All right, so this is your dependent variable. And these three are independent variable. And remember that anything you put in the framework must be supported by a theory. These three independent variables are basically coming from TPB, Theory of Planned Behavior. Fisher and Husband, I think you all know them. So this theory three coming from TPB, and internet abuse is the dependent variable. How many hypotheses can you have? We can have basically H1, H2, and H3. We can have three hypotheses, three independent variables. So we have three relationships. And I've written hypotheses for you. I don't think I'm going to read for you, but I have written three hypotheses in three different styles. Sometimes when we attend the Viva versus session, we see students having similar statements in all hypotheses, and we feel bored, monotonous statements. So I have written three hypotheses in three different ways, so that you can also figure it out when you write hypotheses for a study. So you have three independent variables to one dependent variable, so you can have three hypotheses. Now, independent and dependent variables are also known by different names. Independent variables, sometimes we call them predictor. In that case, dependent variable, we call them criterion. Sometimes independent variable, we call them presumed cause. And dependent variable would be presumed effect. Independent variable, sometimes we call it stimulus. Then dependent variable, we call it response. Okay. Independent variable will be predicted from, and then dependent variable predicted to. Sometimes independent variables are definitely antecedent, and outcome variable will be consequent. Independent variables are variables, remember, so it varies, so it manipulated, but dependent variable definitely is a measured outcome. Shall I continue? Somebody was saying something? All right. So please remember that the predictor and criterion.
Yes,
independent variable are predictor, dependent variable are basically criterions. Now let us look at antecedents or antecedent variable. So earlier I have shown you this framework. So you have three independent variable, one dependent variable. Now you can even have antecedent. And you can see here, you have four antecedent going to attitude. And this four is not coming from the sky. It has to be supported by theory. And I think you know where does it come from. This one comes from technology acceptance model, TAM model. So this usefulness, ease of use, playfulness, and compatibility also coming from a theory. And it goes to attitude, supported by a theory, okay? Peer culture, supervisor culture, this is also coming from a theory, social exchange theory. It goes to subjective norm, and so on. So you can have antecedents. So how many hypotheses can we have now? The main hypothesis, you have attitude to internet abuse 1, subjective norm to internet abuse 1, perceived behavioral control to internet abuse 1. And then here you have many hypotheses. Usefulness to attitude, one hypothesis. Ease of use to attitude, one other hypothesis. Playfulness to attitude, another hypothesis. So first group from TAM, you have 4 hypotheses. Second group, you have 4 hypotheses. And third group, you have another 5 hypothesis. So these variables are basically before the independent variables, so we call them antecedent. And this framework is taken from a real PhD study from USM. So this is not something I'm just showing you for the sake of showing. It's a real PhD thesis framework. Now, let us move to moderating variable. This is how the moderating works. It works in between independent and dependent. The way the moderator box is drawn is wrong. Based on Uma Sakaran, it should be diamond shape. Please remember that. The moderator box should be diamond shape, because independent and dependent, the effect either could be strengthened or could be weakened with the introduction of moderator. I'll discuss more. Say, for example, you are looking at a study, job satisfaction leading to loyalty. Gender could be the moderator. With introduction of gender, the effect of satisfaction to loyalty could be increased, could be decreased. That's what we call moderator. Okay. This is another one based on goal setting theory. We're looking at setting difficult goals to performance. Task ability could be moderating, meaning the effect of setting difficult goals to performance can be increased or decreased with the ability, the task ability of employees. So a moderator basically specifies the condition under which a given effect occurs, all right, as well as the condition under which the direction or strength. So when you write a hypothesis of a moderating variable, then it must show the direction, the strength or weaknesses. It has to be positive or negative relationship, or the stronger or weaker. That kind of word must be there. So this one, I don't think, okay. The last one, the red one, I put it, let me read it. Moderator variables are typically introduced when there is unexpectedly weak or inconsistent relationship between predictor and criterion variable. Remember, predictor is independent and criteria is a dependent variable. So when the research reviews or literature reviews shows that the effect of independent to dependent is weak or inconsistent. Some research shows they have relationship, some research shows there's no relationship. Some research concluded strong relationship, some research concluded weaker relationship. That kind of, some research concluded positive relationship, some research concluded negative relationship. When you have this kind of situation between independent and dependent, then we have to introduce a moderating variable. We cannot simply just introduce moderating variable for the sake of having an additional variable there. So this is back what is in 1997, right? Moderating variable is one that affects relationship between two variables. So the nature of impact of predictor on the criteria. Predictor is independent variable, criterion is a dependent variable, all right? So the impact will increase or decrease. So a moderator interacts between predictor, which is independent variable, in such a way to have an impact on the dependent variable. All right, so this is another example of it. Should we hypothesize the interaction in advance? Yes, definitely. Not only should the existence of an interaction effect be predicted, but also its form. In particular, whether moderator increases or decreases. All right, so that's what Dawson said in 2014. So we have to show the direction whether the introduction of moderating variable will help increase the effect of independent to dependent, or it will decrease the effect of independent to dependent variable. This is a very good way of writing moderating hypothesis. So we say the positive relationship between satisfaction of loyalty and loyalty will be stronger when perceived image is high. Or the positive relationship between satisfaction and loyalty would be stronger for male compared to female. That's how we write moderating hypothesis. So we clearly show the direction of relationship, whether the introduction of moderating will increase the effect of independent to dependent or decrease the effect of independent to dependent variable. This is a framework I have adopted from one of my PhD students. She has concluded based on the literature review that in her area, the studies conducted before based on macro or meso and micro, 3 different studies. But she find it difficult to find any study that has integrated these three micro, meso, and micro factors. So she has combined these three factors together and make it one. That's what you can see. She has integrated three different ones. That's what I was saying. You can have three theories and you can integrate three theories into one. All right. But again, remember, you have to check back the assumptions of the three theories or four theories that you are taking. So the dominant theory would be the underpinning theories, and the rest of the theories should be supporting theory. All right. And then you can see how she has developed her framework. Based on the earlier two slides, she has developed her research framework. And then now she has introduced modulating variable, industry sector, and country of origin. All right. Let's move on to mediating variable. Mediating variable also an intervening variable between independent and dependent variable. And here we got a lot of requirements to have a mediating variable. Okay, so let me proceed with the next one. So it's a mediator. It specifies how a given effect occurs. Describe a mediating variable as the following. So certain one is there. So the generative mechanism through which the focal independent variable is able to influence the dependent variable of interest. And the mediation is based on in the case of a strong relation between predictor and criterion. So basically, mediator would be a linkage between independent and dependent variable. Remember, the moderator can only weaken or strengthen the relationship, but here, mediator will create a linkage between. So let me show you in diagram, would be easier. So now here we say the independent variable causes the mediator, and mediator will cause the outcome, that is dependent variable. This slide is very important, and all researchers should keep in mind. McKinnon et al. 1995. We can only introduce mediator effect or mediating variable when we find that independent variables significantly affect the dependent variable in the absence of mediator, meaning the independent variable that we have selected, it is evident that it has a strong effect on dependent variable. And then we have findings that independent variable affects the mediator variable, and the mediator variable has effect on dependent variable. So that's how it is. So this condition must be met in order to prove that we have a mediating variable. So this is how it works. If you see this diagram, it goes from independent to moderator, moderator to dependent. But this diagram or framework doesn't show the relationship between independent and dependent. So this is not right. This is not right. It shows only independent to moderator, mediator, mediator to dependent. This is right. This is how it should be. For independent to dependent, and then from independent to mediator, and then from mediator to dependent. All right. I'm going to show you a framework, Donori, and explain the hypothesis there. So this is not really right. This is what is right. This is not right. We see many students will do this, which is not also right. If you follow the criteria, 4 criteria here, so based on that criteria, this is not right. This is right. This is not right. So we have to remember that, okay? So this is a framework using the mediating variable. You can see the dependent variable is a career advancement. This is a real PhD thesis framework. And we have independent variables there, individual related factor, we have person environmental fit, and then we have a mediating variable. So we have independent to dependent, you have hypothesis there, and from independent to mediating, we have hypothesis there, and from mediating to dependent, we have hypothesis there. So this is how it is, all right? So that's how a mediating variable is introduced in between that. But we have to make sure that independent variable has clear linkage with dependent variable. Then only, and then we have also evidence that independent variable to mediating and mediating to dependent. When we prove that, that proves that there is a mediating effect from our framework. This is another one, very complex one, also a real PhD thesis framework. Here you can see the first few, those you see anticipated, intrinsic rewards and all that. This is actually independent variable. And in the middle, the one you see as attitude, subjective norm, and organization climate, these are mediating variable, and intention to share knowledge is dependent variable. Okay, so this is a bit complex, and the hypothesis direction also given there. All right. This is another one from TRA and TPV. We know that TRA was first proposed, and then the modified version of TRA become TPV. Right. At the beginning, we have variable behavioral belief, normative belief, and control beliefs, but later the same has been in Fishburne changed to attitude, subjective norm, and perceived behavioral control. It goes to intention, and then it goes to behavior. So again, intention here is mediating variable. All right, but here it doesn't show the clear link with the dependent variable. So in that case, intention could be dependent variable and behavior is the outcome variable. So these are some suggested reading for you. The slide will be available to you. You may refer to these papers to understand more on mediator and moderator variables introduction in the research. There are many. I have put it there for you. Now let us look at outcome variable. I'm very sure many of you never heard of it. And in fact, one of my students, when I asked him to introduce the outcome variable, this was very disastrous, because somehow one examiner was not very familiar with it, and he did not agree with it, and the student failed, just because of that. That was very unfortunate. But there are many studies where outcome variable is very important. Let me show you this framework again. We are going with the same variable. So this is what we have earlier. We have this factors affecting internet abuse. Now, once you concluded this study, people may ask you, I understand that internet is abused. So what? What happens if internet is abused? When you have that kind of hanging dependent variable, you may be required to have outcome variable. So internet abuse may lead to some organization outcomes, and that can be divided into work inefficiency and security threats. Internet abuse may lead to some psychological outcomes of the person who is abusing internet. So it may lead to depression, it may lead to loneliness. So this is what we call outcome variable. I'm very sure it is new to many of you. It is not a requirement for all research. You are not warranted to have that. You are not warranted to have that. But certain research, when our dependent variable is bit of hanging sort of, then we may be required to have outcome variable. So how many hypotheses can we have from this framework? We can have 3 hypotheses from independent to dependent. And from dependent now, with outcome, we can have 4 hypotheses, which I have also written it for you. So we say internet abuse will lead to some organizational outcomes. So internet abuse will lead to work inefficiency, it will lead to security threats. All right, so this is what we say. And then internet abuse will lead to some psychological outcomes, which will lead to depression and loneliness. So you can have also hypothesis for outcome variable. Now let me introduce with you a control variable. This is not an integral part of most of the framework that we work on, but when you have secondary data collected most of the time, we may introduce control variable. Remember, in experimental research, when you come out with something new, especially those engineers and scientists, they will have some control mechanism always there. For example, like temperature, the timing, and many other factors are there as control variable. But for us also, social science and business, we may have control variable. For example, like gender, age, tenure, this all could be control variable. When we develop a framework from independent to dependent, gender could be always a control variable because male and female could be different in terms of many things. The age group, different age group of people may have different perspective on certain issues. The work experience, level of education, the race, personality, and many other factors, those can be put as control variable for many researches. This is an example of how control variable is used. This is one of the PhD research framework of my PhD student. You can see the student look into financial risks and business risks on firm value, and he has a moderating variable there, financial innovation, and then he has the control variable there. And you can see that the way we draw the control variable, the arrow we put dot, dot, dot. It cannot be straight line because you do not test any hypothesis from the control variable. So you put dot, dot, dot. It controls the effect. Those of you who are familiar with running of data in SPSS or PLS, you would know how we do that, right? Basically, we just put that together with the independent variable, and it will control some kind of effect from independent to dependent variable. Is it a must? It is not. It depends on the kind of study that you do. Now, this is the control usage of control variable over time. You can see from 2003 to 2012. In theoretical research, there are very few. In anticipated research, quite a lot. For citation, it's a lot. And if you look at justification, when you are justifying certain findings, then control variables are being used a lot. I think I'm going to skip this slide. Hypothesis part, I think quite clear. I'm not sure whether I should. I think I want to skip that. I'll leave it for your reading. Accepting or rejecting hypotheses, we cannot do it solely based on intuition, right? Based on a certain statistical analysis and all that. So we will have information and then the data, then we do certain analysis using certain statistical methods, and based on that, we'll accept or reject hypotheses. Okay, let me move into another area, theory versus model. All right. For social science, many times, especially for marketing management, we have theories always. So we have theoretical framework. But for finance, accounting, and economics, many times we have model. We don't have theory, rather we go for econometrics modeling. So what is the difference between these two? It says that a theory has only alternative of being right or wrong, because we have certain proposition. Remember, a theory is being proposed based on certain propositions. So when those propositions are proved, then it becomes a theory. Whereby a model has a third possibility. It says it may be right, but irrelevant. So model is developed using certain equations. And I remember one of my PhD students from Jordan, Dr. Rula Halashe, when she developed her model, it took her about, I think, 103 formulas to reach at the optimization of modeling that she has developed. Okay, so it's not about right or wrong. Rather, you develop something and it could be right, but sometimes it may not be relevant to the phenomena that you are looking into. So a model, basically a presentation of a system that is developed to study part of the system or the whole system of the relationship. So when you are developing a model could be tested part by part, or it could be even tested the whole. Okay, so the difference between theory and model, basically, theory is for explanation, and the model is for representation. So the theory will explain the situation, the phenomena, the problem at hand, but the model will represent, the phenomena that we have, and we model it, and then we try to explain it by representing in a model. This is an example of modeling that we have. This is taken from one of my PhD students also. You can see he has 4 models. So actually the third one is the complete model. The other 3 are basically part of the model. So you can have different model and you run it differently, and finally you can have a comprehensive model when you run, and you have hypotheses being tested based on those models. Now let us move to conceptual framework, my last area of today's talk. Conceptual scheme is basically a researcher will formulate relationship between factors identified based on past studies or based on logic and belief. So you don't have any support of theories, okay? So you are developing based on the data and information that derived through grounded theory approach, meaning you find the data and facts and figures. From there we run and we try to come out with something new. It's basically inductive approach, which I have discussed in my last topic, right? Inductive approach, you start with raw fact and figures and data, then by test it, we come out with a theory or model. That's inductive. So conceptual schemes or conceptual framework is basically inductive research. If it is a deductive research, definitely you have to go for theoretical framework, whereby you have a theory. From the theory, you take the variables and develop the framework in test hypothesis. That is definitely theoretical framework. So the main difference between theoretical framework and conceptual framework is theoretical framework is deductive approach, whereby we have theory, and based on the theory, we develop a framework. Conceptual framework is developed based on inductive approach, whereby we start with scratches and then we develop and come out with something new, okay? So we say a conceptual framework basically represents a less formal attempt to organize a phenomena than theories. It deals with concepts. Remember, in a theory, we have ideas, then concept, then construct, then hypothesis, and then the theory. So conceptual framework is developed based on theory, which is the second building blocks of a theory, not at the upper block of a theory. And in a conceptual framework also, basically it presents understanding of the phenomena of interest, and it reflects the assumption and philosophical view of the model of the designer, okay, model's designer. So again, when you have philosophical ontology and epistemological issues there, when we do inductive approach, or we do adopt inductive approach, we will always depend a lot on philosophical foundation of research. So we'll move on to ontology and epistemology. I think that would be another webinar on ontology, epistemology. Hopefully sometime in future, I will have a webinar on it, ontology and epistemology, so that we can have clear understanding of philosophical foundation of research. I would like to remind those of you who are present, if you are doing PhD, a PhD is basically Doctor of Philosophy, you know. It's not Doctor of Management or Marketing, Doctor of Philosophy, meaning that your PhD should have philosophical underpinning. So that's where the ontology and epistemology comes in. But unfortunately, most of the time we concentrate too much on the theory. So we have theoretical framework or concept, we have conceptual framework, and we tend to forget the philosophical foundation for the research, which is ontology and epistemology. So this is an example of conceptual framework. You can see we are looking at impacts, then we are looking at the participants and the skill level, and finally we are concluding on computer literacy, for example. So this is how the conceptual framework is done. Even the steps of conceptual framework is totally different from the steps of theoretical framework. You can see here in the conceptual framework, we start with research problem, then we have hypothesis, then we draw conceptual framework, right? Research problem to hypothesis to framework, then we have assumption, we collect data, we design the research, we review literature, we analyze and interpret, and finally we conclude, which is totally different from framework, theoretical framework. In a theoretical framework, we start with research problem, then we do literature review, then we design our theoretical framework, we do to hypothesis, we have instrumentation, we collect data, we analyze, finally we do conclusion and recommendation. So it's totally different approach, because it is one is deductive, one is coming from inductive. This slide is very clear of differentiating theoretical framework and conceptual framework. Theoretical framework basically provides a general or broader set of ideas, but conceptual framework could be very specific and narrower ideas is there. Theoretical framework based on existing theory, but conceptual framework is based on concepts. All right, theoretical framework could be a form of model, okay, but theoretical framework is conceptual framework is research's own constructed model, not the model being proposed earlier. So it could be also an adaptation of a model from the existing theory. Theoretical framework is well developed, well designed, and accepted by researchers, but conceptual framework may not be acceptable to everyone, but it is a proposal. All right, it's a proposal to people. So there are a few more there, which I'm not going to read. This slide is very good to differentiate theoretical framework and conceptual framework. But again, to recall back, theoretical framework is developed based on a theory, conceptual framework is proposed based on concepts. Theoretical framework is based on deductive approach, conceptual framework is based on inductive approach. Theoretical framework, we basically make policy recommendations based on clear-cut analysis of data which is acceptable. But conceptual framework, we propose something, may not be acceptable to some, or may be acceptable. So there are clear-cut demarcation line between these two. So this is another one, conceptual scheme. It looks like a theoretical framework, but a conceptual framework could be also like it. This is may not be based on theory, but based on your judgment and perceived understanding of an issue or phenomena. My last slide, basically now triangulation become very popular in business and social science research, whereby we do not rely on only quantitative or only qualitative study, okay? So we may have triangulation, so you may have continuous simultaneous study using qualitative and quantitative. We may have ongoing qualitative with multiple waves of quantitative analysis. We may have a situation like we have quantitative, then the qualitative. And we may even have a series of analysis, qualitative, then quantitative, then qualitative. So you have many different approaches are there, which is now getting more popular. Even myself, for those students I supervise, I will always prefer to let them have some kind of qualitative views after the quantitative analysis. Being myself basically a quantitative person, so we do use SPSS and PLS to analyze the data and deductive approach come to a conclusion. But again, I would prefer to have some qualitative findings also based on a focus group or could be interview approach. But again, the qualitative study is completely different area that requires also another webinar. So I have to leave it for that. So I think for today, I would like to end the session here, my presentation here, and I will open up the session, the flow for question and answer. So I will stop presenting so that I can see you all.
Yes,
I cannot
yes, have a good